Prophet ﷺ told us about the importance of as-salah. In a hadith narrated by Tirmidhi, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Miftah al-jannat as-salat wa miftah as-salat al-wudu." So the key to paradise is as-salah, and the key to as-salah is al-wudu. And it's not just praying, just the actions of prayer, but it's a complete salah. So the complete salah is an outward and an inward experience. There's an outward element to it and there's an inward element to it. The outward element is that which the creation sees, that which we engage in, the wudu, the ruku', the sujood, the standing up from ruku', the sitting after the sujood. This is the outward element of prayer. But the inward element of it is that which only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows about and is aware of. And so for one to have a complete prayer, a complete worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he must perfect the outward and the inward as well. So it's an important topic. It's not something that should be neglected, and I'd like to discuss a little bit more about it, inshallah. And the Prophet ﷺ told us about how important as-salah is to him. He said, وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. The coolness of my eyes is in the prayer. And this term, coolness, is something that the Arabs use. قُرَّةُ عَيْن. They say in Arabic, قُرَّةُ عَيْن. And it comes from, it's like saying in English, the apple of my eyes. For those of you that know English, all of us know English, but I mean, for those of us that have studied English, you might have come across the term, the apple of my eyes. This is an expression that shows your delight of something. So, and the reason why the Arabs use this term, قُرَّةُ عَيْن, is in relation to the nature of their environment. So it's taken from, imagine now a person is traveling in the hot desert. And when you're traveling in that kind of environment, it's really hot, it's really dry. So you sweat and you feel thirst and your face is tainted with sand. Sand is on your face. Your clothing is dirty. And you might even feel a sensation of burning in your eyes because you're in the desert traveling. Now imagine after going through that journey in the desert, you come to a pond or you come to a place where there's water that's cool. And then you take up that water and then you put it on your face. What kind of feeling would that be? That would be such an amazing feeling because you're coming from a very rough situation, intense situation, and now you're entering a situation where there's relaxation and coolness and comfort. So it's from that meaning that it's from that where it's taken from that the meaning of qurratu ayn, the coolness of my eyes. So the Arabs describe what's dear to them as the coolness of their eyes, and this is what the Prophet ﷺ used to experience in his prayer. If there is a matter that concerned him or bothered him, he would immediately rush to prayer. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he would leave behind everything and direct himself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and start praying. Allahu Akbar. He would say it and he would mean it. These two words, Allahu Akbar, sometimes we say it but we don't mean it, we don't summon the meanings of these two words to our hearts. But the Prophet ﷺ taught us that if there's anything that bothered us or was of great concern to us, let us turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and enter the prayer. Say Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allah is greater. So we put that ahead of everything else. And the word khashi'ah is mentioned in the Quran many times. So we're talking about khushu', so let's look at some of the derivatives of the word khushu'. Khushu' is, if you break it down to its least form, is composed of 3 letters. Kha, Shin, Ayn. Khushu'. And this word and its derivatives are mentioned many times in the Quran. Allah Ta'ala tells us, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Triumphant are those believers who are khashi'un in their prayer. Khushu', if you want to look at the meaning, it can mean reverential fear. Essentially, we understand it as fear. But it's not just basic fear, it's reverential fear. You're fearing someone that you believe and have conviction in your heart that deserves to be feared and is worthy of fear. And you believe and you remember those very things that He has created, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, that should instill fear in our hearts. So it's a fear that includes ta'zeem as well of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And some scholars went further and said that khushu' is the first level of fear. And then when that khushu', that fear is joined with ma'rifah, knowledge, this is now something even greater. It's at another level. And they call it khashi'ah. Khushu', then khashi'ah. Yeah? And so it now becomes not just reverential fear, but reverential fear combined with humility, devotion, and tranquility. And this is all for the one and only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we all know where prayer stands in our religion. It's the second most important thing after the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's the thing that many are tried by, tested through. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tries us and tests us in many ways in our religion to see if we will come out of that test as those who are truly and sincerely devotional to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or we are just those who are not serious and don't pay much attention and don't care too much. The prayer is one of those things that tests that thing in us and brings out either the best or the worst of people. And so the Prophet ﷺ told us in the famous hadith, which I believe all of us have come to know and hear, بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ شَهَادَةِ أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَأَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وصوم رمضان وحج البيت لمن استطاع سبيلا. So Islam is founded or established upon five main pillars, if you want, or 5 main important things. The Iman, the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The Salah, establishing the Salah, giving Zakat, fasting the month of Ramadan, and performing Hajj for the one who is able. So we can see how important prayer is. If we were to talk about prayer in every single session that's given here, we're not missing out. If we were to talk about prayer in every single session that's given here, it's necessary. And so we have to hold it to that regard. We have to hold the prayer in our heart as something very important to us. And we have to strive to the utmost, based on our abilities, to carry it out, and carry it out in the best way possible. So it's not just performing the actions of prayer, but also we want to use the tools and the means by which we can perfect that prayer for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A lot of times we do things, we try to perfect things. I've mentioned this before, but I like to mention it again. We like to perfect things for our worldly affairs, for people, and sometimes we should rightfully do so, because the Prophet ﷺ told us that if we engage in something, that we should make it our trademark to be masters of that thing, to do it well, So That's for creation. What about for the Creator? What we present and send forth to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, among those things is our prayers. So if we're going to send forth to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a prayer that doesn't have any khushu' in it, or does not have any care attached to it, or is lacking in fear, lacking in realizing the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's not a complete prayer, and we will see on the Day of Judgment the results of our actions. So the prayer is, in other words, a gift. We can look at the prayer as a gift. And we should prepare that gift very well. And when we enter our prayer and say Allahu Akbar, we should put behind all our worldly worries and things that bother us and give us a lot of stress and so on. Put that behind us. With those two words. Say those two words and put it behind you. Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater. And then you put that behind you and continue in your prayer. And the companions of the Prophet ﷺ were extremely overjoyed when they received the prayer. In the beginning, early days of the call of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions used to pray with the Prophet, but it was not the prescribed prayers that we pray nowadays. The 5 obligatory prayers, the Fajr prayer, the Dhuhr prayer, then the Asr prayer, then the Maghrib prayer, and then the Isha prayer. These are the 5 obligatory prescribed prayers that this ummah is obligated to perform. Before that, the companions used to pray the night prayer with the Prophet ﷺ, and they would go through a lot of difficulties performing those prayers. But they became extremely overjoyed when the 5 obligatory prayers were revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. They received this news with great joy, and now the issue became definite, specific, and unambiguous. They now knew, they had a prescribed way of worshipping their Lord, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They would do so at the Fajr time, then the Dhuhr time, then the Asr time, then the Maghrib time, then the Isha time. And these were the 5 obligatory prayers. So the one who is mukallaf is the one who must pay a lot of attention to the prayer. And even before being mukallaf, the parents must give a lot of emphasis to the prayer with respect to their children. You should not leave them just running right, left, and center and not paying attention to the prayer. Rather, you should have a system, a plan in place to try to get them to learn that prayer and to learn it well. So, for the person to pray, he must first be Muslim, of sound intellect, and at the age of puberty. So this does not mean that a non-Muslim is not accountable for the prayers. Rather, he must first embrace Islam before he could actually establish the prayers. So if you know a non-Muslim who's somewhat interested in prayers, he finds it very amazing that Muslims, they are in a congregation, they stand up at the same time, they stand side by side at the same time. And then they bow at the same time behind one leader, one imam. And then they get up from bowing at the same time. And then they go down for sujood at the same time. For a non-Muslim who doesn't see this very often, he stands back and he looks at that sight, he might be overwhelmed and might be attracted to that. And might actually want to copy them. But for that individual, he must first embrace Islam before the prayer can be accepted from him. And once I was sitting with one of the brothers, and we prayed already, and there was a congregation happening before us. And he was just looking at me and said, SubhanAllah, what an amazing sight. It is really an amazing sight. I'm pretty sure all of you have seen it. Like, let's say you prayed already, you come into the musalla, and then there's a group of people praying, there's a congregation. And then you sit back and you say, SubhanAllah, look at that. All of them are facing the Qibla, behind one imam, side by side. This person to the left might have a different financial situation than that person on the right. The person behind might be taller than the person in front. The person at the very back might be stronger physically than the person at the very front, and so on. All these different physical states that these people are in, but they're all in unison when it comes to worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is Islam. Submission to the one and only, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they face the Qibla, they face, and they say Allahu Akbar, glorifying one, who's one without a partner, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is a sight to see. And I believe deep down inside that non-Muslims who have some appreciation for community, when they see that, they are amazed and impressed. But for such individuals, for the prayer to be accepted from them, they must first what? Embrace Islam before they can pray and worship Allah in prayer. And as for the child who's not pubescent, it doesn't mean that just because he's not pubescent, that's it, we ignore him and we just let him play. No. When he's around 7 years old, the parents now have to get serious. Because it's at this age that you have to start training him for prayer. He needs to get training. The same way when we enter a new job, for example. Let's say you apply to a new job and it's a new field, you don't have much experience in the way the company works. What do? They put you through training. 2-week training, 3-week training. What about prayer? You don't think it requires training? For a 7-year-old, it requires lots of training. He has to be trained in making wudu for that prayer. And he must make that wudu really well. He needs training in honoring his appointment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you pray, you have an appointment with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has to honor that appointment. You can't just pray Dhuhr when it's Maghrib, nor pray Maghrib when it's Fajr, nor pray Fajr when it's Isha. No. Fajr, this time to that time, 2 cycles. Dhuhr, this time to that time, 4 cycles. Asr, this time to that time, 4 cycles. Maghrib, 3 cycles from this time to that time. Isha, 4 cycles from this time to that time. Prescribed. This is Islam. Prescribed. So that requires training. And if the child messes up, the Prophet ﷺ did not leave us with no guidelines. He gave us some guidelines. Order them when they're 7 to pray. And if this child is not someone who wants to follow orders, then there's another measure you can put in place to try to discipline that child in an appropriate manner. And the Prophet ﷺ told us all of that. So at the age of 7, you train that child to pray the 5 obligatory prayers. In addition to the 5 obligatory prayers, you train him to be familiar with the Jumu'ah prayer. Maybe take him with you to the Jumu'ah prayer so that he can see the communal congregation of Muslims praying the Friday prayer. So these are all things that are necessary and develop khushu', this thing that we're talking about today, khushu' in the heart of that child. And if the child grows up in that way, it's really far-fetched that he would become careless about worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at an older age. It all starts at the young age. It all starts at a young age. So it all starts at a young age, and also it all starts with the parents. So the parents, you are responsible for your children and for ensuring that they learn about the religion from a credible source, first of all, and second of all, that they pray their prayer properly and the way they should, in a proper manner. And if those parents are heedless and neglectful, then they are worthy of blame in this category. They are worthy of blame. And if the child grows up like that and he doesn't perform his prayers and he's after being pubescent, then he's blameworthy as well. But if you want to trace the blame back to a person, you'd have to go back to the parents and question why didn't those parents raise him in the proper manner and make him familiar with the importance of prayer. So the interesting about khushu' is that if we look into the books of the fuqaha or those scholars that talked about prayer, a lot of times what happened is that this inward aspect of prayer wasn't mentioned too much. And it almost seemed like prayer is just standing up, bowing, ruku', sujood, sitting between the sujood, and reading Fatiha, reading the tashahhud, and then saying Assalamu alaikum. That's what it might seem to a person, that this is all that the prayer is about. But the prayer is far more than that. It's the whole experience. There's more to it than just the outward actions and the things that we do. There's more to it. If you want to talk about in terms of validity, from a validity perspective, yes, these outward actions have an important role. They're not to be neglected nor ignored. But if you want to talk about it from the perspective of completeness and the whole experience, then in addition to the outward actions that we must perform from sujood, ruku', tashahhud, reading al-Fatiha, then we also have to look at the inward aspect of khushu', which completes the prayer for us. Because what did the Prophet ﷺ, I said earlier, مفتاح الجنة الصلاة مفتاح الصلاة الوضوء. So this is where the real spiritual ascension comes to play. When that person pays attention to the outward aspect of the prayer and the inward aspect of the prayer, then this brings about khushu' in the person, and then this is when spiritual ascension and spiritual elevation takes place. It's not by just doing the bare minimum. It's not by just doing the bare minimum. It's striving to do more than just the bare minimum. Striving to do more. So now, let's talk about some etiquettes of the prayer that relate to prayer. Not the prayer itself, but that relate to prayer. More specifically, the wudu. So one thing that, this has been mentioned before, but it's important to, as a reminder, that whenever a person breaks his wudu, whenever you break your wudu, go back and make wudu. So you want to always try to be in that state of purification, that state of wudu, that state of tahara. And I've talked about this before. There's many benefits to it. One of them is that it protects you from shaitan, protects you from waswas, it elevates you spiritually, and it just makes you it gives you that readiness to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It puts you in that state of readiness. And so always maintain your wudu, and to the best of your ability. Whenever you're able to make wudu, go ahead and make it. Like, I understand sometimes you might lose your wudu while driving a car, for example. Or you might lose your wudu while you're in the middle of the street walking. Okay, that happens. That's normal. But the very instant you're able to make that wudu, let's say when you reach your destination, make that wudu. Make your wudu, so that you're in that state of purification and in that state of readiness to